we go. Yeah, the recording was started by Neeraj's AI assistant,
That's
but
kind
not
of a
not by me. That's just for him. All right, so recording has begun. Mr. Neeraj Shah, welcome to the fun, and I will turn it over to you, my friend. I'm going to mute myself. I'll
thank
let you know
you.
if there's any questions along the way. I will let you know.
Sure, thank you, Ken. And Ken, maybe if you can help make it a little bit more interesting to monitor the chat if there are any questions.
That's what I'm doing. Yeah,
And I'll
absolutely.
probably ask a couple of questions here. We didn't embed a tool like a voting tool or anything, but just to make it more engaging, maybe, I'll ask a couple of questions. And if you guys can put your answers in the chat, that'll make it a little bit more engaging and interesting conversation, guys. So thank you so much, Ken, for the very nice introduction. Guys, but before I start, is the slide okay, or should I put it in the display mode, like the power, or is the size? Wait, let me check. Is this? I'm sure this is better, right?
That's really good there. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's good.
Yeah. So I'm not going to be tracking the chats, but
I will. I'm
okay,
watching it
okay.
carefully, so
Okay,
no worries,
I'll
my
do it
friend.
here. Sorry. I'll just keep it here at the bottom. Just in case. So a little bit about myself. Thank you very much, Ken. So I've been a member of ASCM Boston chapter or Minuteman chapter for, I think it's almost like 18, 20 years. In Massachusetts, but for a few years I was in New Jersey, so I was not very actively involved. But since I came back, in 2021, once again, I've been quite active with the chapter. So that's about my relationship with the chapter. So close to 20 years with the chapter. My background, so I've been with the pharma industry for the last 20 years. And then a couple of years, so almost like last year is when I decided to, come out of the industry and launch our startup called Boston Insights. All my life, I've been focused on supply chain, mostly spent my time with pharma supply chain, which is basically two aspects. One is the commercial supply chain, which is about a product that is already released to the market, means approved by FDA. And there's something called clinical supply chain, products that are still undergoing clinical trials and waiting for approval. And we focus on clinical supply chain as as a startup, and we built a control tower. While the focus, we as a company, we focus on on pharma industry and clinical supply chain, but everything that we do here, does apply to any industry vertical in terms of risk management and enabling resilience, visibility, and agility using a control tower. So that's a little bit about me and the company and what we're going to talk about. So I have a question is, on a scale of 1 to 5, all of you who are here, where do you see risk management in terms of supply chain? How important is risk management in terms of supply chain? 5 being the highest, 1 being the lowest. So we'll give like 30 seconds. If you guys can respond in the chat, that'd be great. Just to get an idea. I think there's a background, guys, background noise, if you don't mind muting yourself.
So Neeraj, we have a 9, a 4, a 3.
No, a scale of 1 to 5, I said, not 10. Sorry.
Toss out the 9. Then we have let's see, a 4, a 3, a 5, and a 4.
Okay, so this is
another 4. So there's the lay of the land for that one.
So is the response based on 1 to 5, right? So
yep.
4,
except
4,
for the
4,
9.
5, excepting the 9. So I would assume that is a 4.5 on a scale of.
Yeah, that sounds about right. They were a lot closer to 5. Oh, okay. Yeah, it's 5, a 5, and 2 more 4s. So you're all set. All right, I'm going to mute myself again, but there you go.
Okay, thank you, guys. So this gives a good idea, the level of interest and on this topic, and also like how important you think it is, because this is what we do every day. And I'm going to talk about, about the whole concept of control tower and how it can help you in enabling a resilient supply chain, how you kind of go about in setting up the control tower, what is a control tower, and how it can help you in managing risk for your supply chain. Okay, so I'll move on. Okay, so agenda, briefly, very briefly, very quickly, I'll introduce Boston Insights. I've kind of talked about it, but just 30 seconds. And then we talk about what is the challenge today? What is the challenge that we are facing as an industry, or more like as a supply chain professional, in terms of managing supply chain risks? So driving, risks that drive supply chain disruption. What are those risks? Understanding those risks, and recognizing that those risks. And then a little bit about what is the financial impact, or rather what is the big picture. We kind of see these risk events happening and we hear about disruptions happening in the supply chain, but what is the big picture? What is in terms of financial impact? Recognizing risk management as an essential function in supply chain. And this is something interesting. I would definitely solicit feedback from you guys, but we are going to talk about, is risk management also like one of the functions, or should be one of the functions in supply chain, end-to-end supply chain? What are the building blocks if you want to build a resilient supply chain? And then the whole risk management life cycle, assessing, and then how do you assess whether, if you have a resilient supply chain, right? If your supply chain is resilient, and then what are the key takeaways at the end? And then of course we can do some Q&As. And however, you can feel free to stop me if something is not clear, or if you want to share something, or if you had a question. Moving on. Okay. Very quickly, as I said, Boston Insights focuses on the pharma industry. So the control tower, from the perspective which has been built, is for RX supply chain, which is basically prescription drug supply chain. And the focus that we do, we focus on clinical trial supply chain. And this is what we do. The solutions that we built is, digital transformation. So it's a mix of services and solutions that we have. We have a product, basically, which is a clinical supply chain control tower, which enables global risk management, helps in digital transformation of your supply chain, and it also helps in improving your operations. Some of the business outcomes that you can see on the right-hand side: activate real-time visibility, global visibility, and collaboration of your teams, enabling supply chain agility. And of course, all this leads to having a resilient supply chain. And eventually, there's a huge waste in our industry, because of the fluctuations in demand, and there's a high level of inventory that is maintained, and because of that, we end up wasting a lot. But that is specific to our industry, which I don't want to talk too much about it unless somebody's interested. But these are the business outcomes that we claim we can help the companies to achieve through the implementation of a control tower. Moving on. Okay, so now we'll talk about the challenge, the supply chain disruptions due to risk events. Okay, so what are the challenges, right? So if you look at the entire landscape, right, and there are different kinds of risks happening today, it is important for us to kind of, and even before we try to solve the problem, it is important for us to understand what are the factors, or what are the groups of factors or categories of risk that we need to address. Because once you understand the lay of the land, the entire ecosystem, you can then come up with a better way. Depending upon which industry you belong to, you can have a better solution in place. So we'll start with the macro factors, things that are more global in nature, things that are not so much in your control, events or risk events that could be more unpredictable. You can't really do much about it. It happens, but you have to be ready to deal with it. And that's kind of grouped, as you can see, that's the first category of risk, which could be related to the severe weather events, which has increased tremendously in the last couple of years. You've seen that, right? The most recent examples being Helene and Milton. And there has been a huge disruption of the supply chain because of those two events. I think Helene has been, they have termed Helene as the next, the second biggest hurricane in 50 years, after the one that we had a few years back, right? So it has had a huge impact. A lot of natural disasters happening, public health risk, which we have gone through a couple of years back, COVID, and then the escalating geopolitical tension. So if you think about these factors, these are more like macro factors. You can't really plan a lot about it, but at least you can have some contingency planning. If something happens, what is your plan B, right? So these are those factors. Then if you look into your supply chain, right? Not the entire environment, but your supply chain. Every supply chain is unique depending upon the industry, right? And every supply chain has its own challenges. In our industry, in the pharma industry, we face, especially in the clinical trials, we face like huge fluctuations in demand because patient enrollment is highly variable. The demand is highly variable, and but it is very important that we have the drug available on time for the patient. But similarly, just like our industry, the industry in which you are working could have the same challenge. The manufacturing lead time, um, I'm not an expert in all different verticals, but again, coming back to the pharma industry, manufacturing happens all over the globe, right? Sourcing happens all over the globe. So what happens is, the supplier risk, you have multiple tiers of suppliers. We have contract manufacturers. There are risks related to those extended supply chain. And there's most of the time, big pharma or even mid-sized pharma, what they'll do is they will outsource the manufacturing, and that leads to a lot of risk in terms of manufacturing lead times, variability in the lead times. So I'm assuming some of these challenges are with other verticals as well. But why we call it more like predictable is you understand your supply chain. Okay, you can assess, you can evaluate the risk that you may have, high, medium, low, severe, whatever that is, and you can at least plan for that ahead of time. Unlike the first category, which is something happens, it just happens, and then you have to really react very quickly. Whereas in this case, you can build pretty solid contingency plans, depend upon the assessments, depend upon the countries that you're working with, depending upon the lanes and the supply chains that you have currently, right? How mature that is. The third category is again global in nature. If you are working across the globe in different countries, as you know, like a lot of tension going on with different countries, right? So imposition of tariffs just to counter the other country, or to protect yourself, that is on the rise. Now how do you manage that? There are a lot of economic sanctions. If you've been watching the news recently, import export restrictions and or complex customs processes. So this kind of adds a layer to that, because when things change suddenly, or when you have complex custom or import processes, you need to plan for that, right? So again, this is important because some of these issues, if you're not compliant with some of the trade requirements, you could end up with a lot of trouble, huge amount of sanctions, huge fines, and that could completely disrupt your supply chain. Regulatory yeah.
So over at our company, we have a lot of process and review work of what all the stuff we're getting from China. Do we bring it in early? Because if you bring it in early, so you have extra inventory. That's never a good thing, but it's way cheaper than paying 30% tariffs. So we're bringing in a ton of stuff early. A lot of companies, I was talking to Chris Maloof on our board. He's looking at some of those things too. So there's a lot related to that risk factor in particular for China, nearshoring or reshoring back to the US. A lot is going to happen in that area.
Yeah, exactly. Great example. So yeah, making those decisions, right? And how do you evaluate that, right? Is having excess inventory okay, or do we wait for that and we end up paying 30%, 40%, because there is a lot of tension between, especially China and some other countries, West Asia, as you know, what has been going on, the whole Russia-Ukraine war. So this has put a lot of pressure on the supply chain. So this is something, that we really need to think about depending upon which industry and how much you're importing or exporting to other countries. Regulatory compliance, again, a big topic for us. We have to get approvals. The pharma industry or the life science industry requires approvals at every level from the different regulatory compliance. Regulatory bodies, like so it takes a lot of time. Sometimes the lead times are very long, and it impacts our industry in a big way. So when we are ready to start a clinical trial, we have to submit a lot of paperwork, documentation, and we have to wait for the regulatory approval. And what happens is it starts eating into the patent lifespan that we have. So the more they delay in the approval of starting the clinical trial, it is eating into that. And go to market or go to clinic, we call it first go to clinic and then go to market, which is basically the product launch, gets delayed. And every day or every month we delay product launch, it costs us money, right? So regulatory compliance basically definitely impacts your supply chain. And then finally, cyber attacks. I don't know how many of you have heard the news recently. So and I'll share a picture after this, as basically, Stop and Shop and Hannaford has been impacted by cyber attack. Just, I think 2 days back, I was watching the news yesterday, and the shelves are empty. So I was wondering, like, what could have happened that, for a grocery chain like that, there would be a cyber attack and it could affect the common man. Right. So, and you might have heard about the other attack that we had, which was this one. Let me share that with you. So the CrowdStrike, right? So that happened sometime in July, and it had a big impact because of air freight, because a lot of flights had to be canceled. And again, shipments that are done, over air freight, that got heavily impacted. So,
Neeraj, I was in line at Chennai Airport in India, and I could not get on my plane to Madurai. Well, and they broke out a manual book that they just happened to have from not too many years ago, and they opened it up and they started writing out baggage tags and boarding passes on paper. So I lived it. And the other risk, you had mentioned cyber attack, MKS. There was a publicized huge stopping of the supply chain with MKS, big company in the area that was attacked, and they couldn't do anything. They were literally shut down for a while. So
for almost like a week, it impacted the supply chain. So so as going back here, data breaches, software vulnerability, every day we are using more like SaaS-based solution, cloud-based solutions, but they are highly vulnerable to all these cyber attacks and data breaches, security breaches, malware attacks, email phishing, you name it, right? So at least these are the primary categories that could disrupt your supply chain. And, as supply chain leaders, we really need to think through these, right? So this is almost like in your ecosystem in terms of risk, different kinds of risk. Now, it may be for one company, it may be one of these factors may be more, another it may be less, but overall, is there anything else that you guys think that any of you might have faced recently beyond these categories?
I am monitoring the chat. Regulatory compliance, Neeraj, over here at my company, there's a lot with that. And, some of them are legal requirements that we have to do for the government. If you sell in certain states, California is a good example, there's certain requirements we have there regulatory wise in our products. And also, I have one comment, Robert Lombardo, CBAM. Also, we have requirements that include not just legal,
what is CBAM?
but they're customer requirements where we want to just take care of the customer, even though it's not legal. I don't know, Robert, can you explain what CBAM is?
Yeah, it's the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. that's been put
Oh,
out by
sustainability,
your,
is that
yes,
sustainable?
it's related
Okay,
to, yes.
so kind of covered here. So sustainability, regulatory compliance. Yeah, but good point. Okay, I didn't know that acronym. Okay.
Yeah,
So,
a little different than the typical regulatory schemes though, because it travels upward through the supply chain to trace the carbon emissions and other data like that. So it's extremely disruptive to the supply chain.
Yes, absolutely. It's very critical, and it's increasing by the day. There are more and more regulations coming for meeting the sustainability requirements, especially the carbon footprint.
They did delay the scope 3, which was good. They delayed that, but I think scope 1 and 2 are still ongoing. And there could be a lot of changes in regulatory with the new administration coming in too, right, Neeraj?
Yeah, yep, absolutely. Hopefully the regulations are a little bit less, but again, something that is, and you also have to think in terms of not just the country in which you're operating, right? So if you're working with other countries, what are their requirements, right? So end of the day, your supply chain, design of your supply chain or your risk management capability is driven by where your customers are.
yeah, my colleague recently on a business trip, so his work phone was scanned by the he has a Wi-Fi or Bluetooth on, so that affect everything. So have to shut down, close it out because that related to the whole network system, ERP system, and then the whole company. So that is also got to be careful with the cell phone when you have then all those information on your business phone that being scanned. So saying that if you are out there, maybe shut down the disconnect the Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. Yeah, that is
Okay,
dangerous.
that's a very good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yep. Thank
Neeraj,
you.
that's Agnes from our board of directors. Thank you, Agnes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the voice sounded familiar to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, okay. Anything else, guys? Anybody if wants to share? Okay. All right. So, hopefully you kind of, you can see, what are the different risk categories. Then moving on, just a few pictures here. We wanted to show you this just happened like yesterday we came to know, right? And then the CrowdStrike was a big one. And then the combined impact of the two storms that we were talking about, Milton and Helene, it put an immense pressure on the supply chain, leading to longer lead times, higher costs, potential shortages of goods. And it's across the board, right? It's not a single industry specific, right? It's impacting all industries. So you can see this is real now, and it's happening every month, perhaps every week, in some part of the world. So what do we do? Okay, I'm not going to go through the details over here, but just wanted to give you a glimpse. This is, a case in point from the pharmaceutical industry, but you can see like at a high level what this is leading to, right? So severe weather, and this is not specific to a particular company or anything, but this is just an aggregate information. Production disruptions due to severe weather, it could lead from anywhere from 100,000 to 500, 500,000 daily, right? Temperature controlled storage products that a lot of times we have to ship in our industry, like it could be impacted significantly, almost like per occurrence, you can lose up to $1 million. So just some examples here, guys, supply chain delays, 15 to 25% rise in logistics cost, facility modifications. So because these things are happening so often, you have to modify your facilities. So there is going to be a significant investment in that. So short term, medium term, long term, what are those investments and strategies that you have to focus in to address the different categories of the risk that we talked about. Just a glimpse,
Neeraj, we experienced there was no disruption, luckily, because we had excess inventory on this particular thing. But when the hurricane hit down south, we didn't even think of this. It impacted I believe it was a quartz supplier in South Carolina, one of the few sole sources of this material. So, you really have to be aware of, all of, most companies can't figure out all of the many risks along the way that turned out to be bigger than many risks. So it's always good to get help with this kind of stuff. So I appreciate it.
Yep. So just a glimpse of what it means in terms of the financial impact. So if we at least agree that there is risk happening, repeatedly happening, we are getting impacted by different directions, right? Within the ecosystem. How do we enable a resilient supply chain? And that's the big question, right? With proactive risk management strategy. So while we are going to talk about control tower, of course, but let's look into the entire ecosystem. And this is a very important section that I really want to talk about and get your input. So supply chain is a combination of three things, right? We are all experts in supply chain here, years of experience. And let me know if you disagree with this. Three areas, right? You have supply chain processes that you have to work on, which is very standard, as you know. Then the second is, the physical flow of material, which is happening, right? And the third, equally important, the third pillar is the flow of data and information. So as you are executing the processes, right, there is, based on what you do, it impacts the flow of physical materials, and it also impacts the flow of data and information. And pretty much all three areas are vulnerable to risk. Let me know. So that is the reason I've said risk management is across these three lanes or the three pillars of supply chain. Anybody who disagrees with that or has a different opinion?
Nothing in chat.
Okay, we'll give some more time. I think something came up. Somebody
wrote,
flow
I
of
would
cash.
add
Okay,
flow of
okay.
cash. Yeah.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Yes. Yeah, good point. Anybody else, guys? Okay, so the thing is, guys, if all of these, all of these three pillars are vulnerable to risk, right? How do we go about ensuring that we have a robust risk management capability? And what I'm telling the industry is, guys, just like the way we have plan, source, make, deliver, and return, right? So there are people who are planners, who do forecasting, planning, people who do sourcing, people who are involved in manufacturing or outsourcing, who are involved in logistics, deliver and manage returns. One recommendation is, can we have risk management also as a function? Because every organization has a planning organization, has a purchasing procurement department, right? Has a logistics department. Or we make risk management a piece of each of these functions. If we don't want to have a separate risk management function, because see, this whole thing, all these three layers are not operating in a vacuum, right? They're operating in an environment, right? And that environment is full of risk, which is what we talked about, right? So that ecosystem or that environment is full of risk, some that you can proactively manage, some that you cannot manage, you can't even visualize, you don't even get to know until it happens, as Ken just said, right? So this is one recommendation. You may or may not agree with me right now, but something to think about when you go back to your organization, that, hey guys, what are we doing about risk management? Do we have something in our organization? Is it part of every function? So when we are planning, how do we embed risk management as a part of planning, sourcing? Of course, procurement guys do that. All of these things, I'm sure we do it, but is it really recognized as a function that really needs to play an equally important role, just like these do? You see, guys? And now that we see this, so that is one recommendation. But now that we see this, right, how do we go about setting up the infrastructure, setting up that process to manage the risk which will basically manage the vulnerabilities that each of these pillars are faced with? We'll move on to the next section here. Okay, so control tower, right? So risk control tower or supply chain control tower, whatever you want to call it. And the control tower does just much more than just risk management. It is, if you think, imagine the control tower sitting in the center here. These are the 4 areas that it has to work with. Number 1 is people, right? Even before we can go to the digital system and a system or whatever you call it, right? So the control tower itself, cannot do much if your people are not trained how to use it, and you don't have a strategy in place. So that is where I want to start with. These are the building blocks of having a resilient supply chain, where your risk control tower sits right in the center. You start with your people, no matter how big or small your team is. You need to think about a contingency planning, right? Of course, you have to identify the risk even before you can plan the contingencies or a business continuity plan. But from a people perspective, you have to think about having a team in place. What are they going to do? What are they going to be responsible for? So, develop a business continuity plan or a contingency plan. You might want to have a crisis management, because risk management and crisis management are 2 different things, but still they kind of talk to each other. Having a crisis management task force, assign clear roles and responsibilities for people, who is responsible for what. So when things happen, who are the people who needs to, get into action, and establish communication plans. This is very important, because a lot of times in my career, I've seen things happen. Some people know, other people don't know. Some people are just trying to manage things, right? But we don't have a comprehensive response to that risk. And that is where things fail. So we start with people. So we put together a team, we have a game, in terms of people, we have a game plan. But then, of course, you look into your supply chain processes, and identify the vulnerabilities in the supply chain. Once you have identified that, you need to start thinking about a risk management framework. What is my risk management framework? When I say framework, what is that, right? It kind of goes back to the people. It's about, the digital system that you may be using, or a tool that you may be using, how you are leveraging your data. So this framework should include everything, starting with your risk assessment. How do you assess your risk? How do you identify? How do you rate your risk? All of that. And then you put together a framework of how all these resources that you have, how are you going to utilize those resources? One of the important thing I think that all organizations should start doing is having a risk register, a centralized global risk register for your supply chain. We are talking to supply chain folks, so I'll just focus on supply chain. You should definitely think of having a global risk register, wherein it will be visible to all the key people in your organization, to the VP of your supply chain, so that whoever is finally accountable for making sure that your supply chain is functional and it's not staying in a disruptive state for too long, right?
Hey, Neeraj.
Yeah.
We do have at the company here I work at, we have customers who insist on it, to the point of they signed up with some company called Resilink. And then I as the point of contact
Resilink,
in supply chain. Yeah.
Resilink we are talking to Resilink to partner with them to get the supply chain risk data, and we will bring it into our control tower. So I was just talking to the CEO of Resilink.
I love it. I love it. Well, we get a lot of emails from customers through them that says, were you impacted by this, or were you impacted by that? And we have to write no impact or some impact. So it's what you're saying is right on target, and our customers insist on it. By the way, there's a couple of comments. David Ogan said, thinking about it, a risk management group in a company can not only assess risk to your supply chain, but also assess risk of your company to your customer's supply chain, which can be a value add proposition for a prospective customer. We figure, he wrote in quotes, we figure out how to ensure a steady supply of our stuff to you. And then there was a second comment from a different fellow, John, that says, I think it's more common to have risk management associated with various activities. The issue is some of the data points, such as forecast and demand, might not be realistic. This eventually impacts the ROI as well as the trust between the various departments. So very good comments. But anyway, I will go back to mute and just, there you go.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for these comments. And definitely, if you're interested, we can do a little bit more brainstorming on this. But for the purpose of this meeting, we'll continue. But thank you for the feedback. And then implement risk assessment and prioritization process. So it's not only enough to assess the risk, but also prioritize the risk. And once you prioritize the risk, you come up with a game plan of how you're going to address the risk. And then finally, the risk skill. Now, again, this is not all comprehensive. I'm not claiming that this is everything that you should do, but this just gives you some key pointers to what you should think in terms of risk management processes. Then comes your tools and the systems, right? So again, I'm not assuming that every organization has ton of money to invest in digital systems and you are all very digitally mature, right? But you need to think, where your supply chain data is, what are the risks associated with that? What is the risk exposure to that? How do you ensure visibility to your supply chain? Because unless you know what's going on in your supply chain, how are you going to find out what the vulnerabilities are with your supply chain, right? And then how are you going to address it? So you should definitely think about, even in a small way, how can you make your supply chain visual, right? So almost like a digital twin. So if you have a physical supply chain, is there a way to make sure that your stakeholders can have visibility to your physical supply chain? Things like implementing business rules driven alerts, integrating supply chain data into the risk control tower bed. So basically, what is a control tower? Control tower is nothing but, in the way we define it, if you Google, you will get a lot of definitions, but broadly, one common underlying definition is it's a centralized, a unified system, right? Which basically brings data from across your value stream, supply chain value stream, right? And it enables global visibility of your supply chain. It helps you in decision making. It helps you in, enabling risk management. So the way we call it is our control tower, the clinical trial, we call it's one-stop shop workbench. Okay, so when the planner or the logistic guy comes into work, or whatever, working from home or wherever, right? So this is a platform that you are logged in all day. You may have multiple transactional systems. You may have an ERP system. You may have some other systems and all of that, but data flows into a central data hub, and the control tower sucks in the data from the from the centralized data hub, so that you have a 360-degree view of your global supply chain. That is what a control tower is. And then finally, to enable, so to make sure this control tower is effective, impactful, you need to have data. You need to leverage your data and analytics. So leverage data and analytics. Implement different levels of analytics. There are different maturity levels. You can get to the level of predictive and prescriptive, and then use real-time risk signals, which will actually help your user to be alerted about those risks, right, when things happen. Because even in some of the leading companies in our industry, we had a very primitive way of risk management, where people will be watching the news, and then only they find out that something has happened in a certain area where there may be a lot of inventory sitting, or there may be a lot of shipments in the way, which might get impacted. And by the time you are ready to react, of course, it is reactionary. You react. There's very little proactive planning, and it's already done. You've already lost that. So something to think about, to putting the control tower in perspective. You should definitely have all of these four working in tandem for your control tower to be effective. Any question, anybody here? Because we don't have a lot of slides, so I want you to take it back, to your day job and start thinking about it, right? So
a comment from Diksha. Not sure if I am jumping ahead, but do you have an example of a control tower as to how it helps supply chain making decisions on business continuity, which is your key thing you want to do with supply chain risk, right? Is keep your
Yes.
continuity. So especially to your customers.
So what is your question, Diksha? So if you don't mind sharing.
Like, do you have not a real-time example, like a number, like some example with the number, like to show, okay, if that was the forecast, now with the supply chain disruption, now, the demand supply imbalances, and then with the control tower, how control tower is going to suggest, what supply chain needs to be proactive on rather than reactive,
Yeah. I can share an example. So for example, right, so this again, it happened real life, right? So 2 years back, when the Russia-Ukraine war started, right, we were running, that time I was working in one of the leading global pharma companies, right? When that war started, they were almost like close to 100 clinical trials running in that space, right? Between Russia and Ukraine, there were a lot of clinical trials. We had no idea at that time how many patients got impacted, how many clinical sites got impacted, how many depots, distribution depots got impacted, what was the inventory impacted, how can we reassign patients, can we move patients from one site to another, because this happened so rapidly. Even to find out what was the impact, right? How many sites were impacted, means when I say sites, means clinical sites where patients go to take the drugs, to get the drug dispensed. It took us weeks to even find that out. Forget about even responding. So think about, from a business continuity perspective, if we had that information readily available, and if you have a control tower, that information should be available to you in seconds, immediately, because based on your digital twin, you will know, I have so many sites, I have so many depots, I have so many manufacturing sites in this and this country, right? If the war has happened here in this region, if you kind of do a geofencing, you will know exactly what is the level of impact. Like as Ken was saying, companies who provide that data, the impact data. So there are two things in risk management, right? One is the level of, you calculate the level of impact on your supply chain based on the severity of the risk that has happened and the probability of occurrence. The probability of occurrence was 100% because it had already happened. But what is the severity of risk, right? What is the severity of that risk event? If you know that, you can quickly calculate what is the impact on these assets in your supply chain. And then you can quickly, it is of course, not that you could have planned for a war, right? That, okay, you would plan your supply chain that, okay, a war is going to start. You could, if you had enough time, but at least the time to react would be much faster, and you could save a lot in terms of your end customer and your supply chain. And probably your business will be back to near normal. I wouldn't say fully normal, or better than the situation we were into, much faster if you had a control tower. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, it does. Thanks, Neeraj.
Thank you. And then finally, if you have made the effort to put together, and again, guys, this is not something, oh, sorry, I didn't go through this. So coming back to here, so this is not something will happen in a day. It's a process. It's an ongoing process. Okay, it will take years, but the thing is, how do we get better every day? So tomorrow should be better than today. So that is how this journey is going to be. And then coming more from a risk management process, we should think about risk management life cycle. Just broadly, probably all of you know this, but we don't tend to think about it, right? So make sure we have mechanism to identify the risk, whether it is a manual process or automated process or getting the data from a third party. What is the risk history? What are the risk signals? Whether it's a risk register, risk alerts, how do you get to know about the risk as soon as it happens? Risk identification, risk impact and risk prioritization. So it could be an automated process, or it could be some way that you have a governance team that does risk assessment and prioritization. what is your risk? Who, that team that we were talking about here, right? This team on the business continuity plan or the mitigation plan or the contingency plan, you know, they are the ones who are working on the mitigation strategy. It could be at an individual level that, you know, again, going back to the previous slide, how your organization is structured to handle the risk, because end of the day, you need a team from, you know, person representing each function. It's not a one-man thing that can be done, right? Okay, I can do all the risk mitigation because it's a teamwork. So what is my risk mitigation strategy? How do I put the risk mitigation? And then not only putting the strategy, how do I execute it? And then how do I measure it? You monitor it and then you close it. And then you evaluate yourself. Okay, guys. So think about this cycle. So are you following a process like this or not? That will help you to gauge how mature you are, right? Or you're just capturing it but not doing anything about it. Or are you siloed? Are you working in tandem with your peers in the organization so that as a team you're able to address it? And then
Neeraj, there's a comment from Myra that says, besides digital twins and data, what else can be used to bring to end-to-end visibility into your supply chain processes in order to help with risk management? All right, I'll step back later.
Yeah, so data is foundational, guys. So Myra, without data, if you're not able to bring in the data, it's more about your transactional data. See, one of the biggest challenge the industry is also facing is we have all these systems, but everything is siloed. It's almost like the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. So it is very important when you start this journey in this, you should have a person from technology or somebody who understands data and the significance of data and how you can leverage. Because if you cannot bring the data together, it's very, very difficult to even to identify your risk and then respond to that. I mean, beyond that, if I go back to your question, beside digital twin and data, what else can be used to bring end-to-end visibility? It's an interesting question. I'll have to think about it. But see, the thing is, data is the underlying factor, right? Because that is what tells you the truth. Yeah, I really don't know. Sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry, but I don't know what else to say, because data is what tells you the truth and it gives you insights into your supply chain. So digital twin, I'm not saying that you have to have a digital twin, but data and being ability to visualize that data in a meaningful way. It's almost like the data will tell you the story, what's going on. So that is the capability you must have, not that you have to have a digital twin, if that helps. And then finally, how do we assess your supply chain, right? So at least this is from Capgemini Research Institute, and what they say is there are 4 factors, right? Visibility, as I said in the beginning, across the entire supply network. Do you have agility? And what agility means is your supply chain able to respond quickly, faster than before, to the changing environmental conditions? How quickly can you adapt to the environmental situation or changing situation, right? Do you have a contingency planning process in place, which you can quickly put together? And then are you diversifying things like supplier base, manufacturing, logistics? Because if you have these 4 capabilities, then you can claim that, okay, you are in a pretty good shape, not perfect, but in a pretty good shape. So I think that's all about it. Some key takeaways, as we talked about, supply chain risks are rapidly increasing every year. I think we all recognize that. How do we identify those risks on time, real time, almost real time? Understanding what are the risk categories, what are the dependent risks, that you have to address, and what could be the impact. So basically this will help you in prioritizing your risk, understanding the key building blocks and appreciating that so that you can put all of these together. Start thinking in terms of the risk management cycle. Are the risks getting closed, and how effective were your strategies? Because if it was not effective enough, then you have to improve the next time, make changes to some of your strategy, and then evaluate your current resiliency of your supply chain and go through a continuous improvement process.
This is great stuff, Neeraj. Hey, Neeraj, there's a note here from Myrigan that says, for example, if using SCORE model, does the process architecture along with the end-to-end process mapping help with creating the foundation needed for risk management? So
absolutely. Why I'll say that? Because see, when you map your process, you identify the gaps that you have, right? The gaps in decision making, the vulnerabilities in your process, right? The vulnerabilities in your system, the lack of or the silos in your process and the silos in your system. So absolutely important. That would be very helpful. Maybe you answered your own question. Maybe I should have thought about it. Yeah, that's a very good point.
This is great. So we up to Q&A now? Any further Q&A from the participants? Any questions? This is all real world stuff we can use back at our own companies or someday when we're working at companies for the students. There's things to think about. You have to think about risk management ahead of time. Seeing no further questions. So I did put a survey link in the chat window. I also put a link for the certificate as well as where the recording is going to go. Neeraj, be sure to send me that PDF of the PowerPoint. We'll get that up along with the recording. And excellent work. The Massachusetts Minuteman chapter will be sending you a small token of our appreciation, Neeraj, for doing this speech. Really appreciate it. That will be coming via email from Sandeep. It's not spam. It's real. So you'll get that the next day or two.
Pleasure.
But just an excellent job. And we're going to stay on and just continue to network for whoever wants to stay on for at least a few more minutes. And thank you so much, Neeraj. You can hang out and chat if you like or not. But we really
I'll be here for a
appreciate
couple of minutes if anybody wants to still ask any questions or anything.
And I will kill the recording so the shy people don't have to worry about the recording.